Hello and welcome to NewsClick. You're watching Present, Past and the Future. Public attention in recent days has been consumed by the coronavirus disease 2019 or COVID-19. Going by the extent of media coverage in most institutions, it almost appears that communal violence never took place in Delhi barely days ago. There is no denying that there is a public health crisis with potential of assuming epidemic proportions in India and pandemic dimensions globally. Unfortunately, the government's handling of the challenge leaves much to be desired. Obviously, the government underestimated the risk. No efforts were made to increase diagnostic facilities. There is still just one institute equipped to test for coronavirus, the National Institute of Virology, Pune. Our quarantine facilities too are obsolete and unscientific. Even after several weeks, no overall comprehensive plan exists regarding evacuating Indians trapped in countries where the scale of the outbreak is much bigger. One word describes the Indian government's initial response: nonchalance. Now its handling of the issue has done little but create panic and shortage of black marketing of masks and hand sanitizers. Amid the challenge which India and the world faces, it is necessary to recall India's worst health epidemic 100 years ago. Called the Spanish flu, although there was nothing particularly Spanish about it, the influenza hit India between 1918 and 1920. It is estimated that 18 million Indians lost their lives to the virus or its complications. This was almost 6% of the Indian population of that time. Globally, Spanish flu took the lives of anything between 50 to 100 million people. This figure was estimated to be much more than both world wars put together. Although the epidemic first manifested itself in Europe in 1918, when the First World War ended, colonial authorities made little preparations. As a result, the disease became rampant in India the moment infected Indian troops returned from the front. The government also made little preparations, even though near-famine conditions left Indians in a state of perpetual hunger from the beginning of the 20th century. To top all this, the monsoon failed in 1918. In 2018, many discussions were held to mark the centenary of this forgotten pandemic. Evidently, no lessons were learnt. I have with me Prabir Purakais, the editor-in-chief of NewsClick, to discuss the threat of COVID-19 and the government's handling of the crisis, besides, of course, the past of Spanish flu a century ago. Let's begin with Prabir, the government's response to the outbreak of the coronavirus. It's been since December 2019. That's the time that we started hearing more about coronavirus. Initially, it appeared that this is not our problem. India is an island. We will not get in any way impacted. That is what was the message which appeared to come from the government. Is this actually the same sense that you had then?
Well, of course, if you listen to the Indian media, that might have been the response that we get, or to the government, which didn't seem to be too concerned about it. But if you look at the health experts globally, there is no question that it was expected that this will get into other continents, and we are probably looking at a pandemic. Why is that so? Because the rates of infection or the spread from one person, how many people can be affected, that seems to be quite high. It may not be as high as the flu, because as you know, flu epidemic takes place, or flu epidemics may not take place, but flu outbreaks take place every year and affects a very large part of the global population. Every season, and affects a very large part of the global population. So this seems to have rates of infection, the spread, which are comparable to flu, though relatively still lower, but still it's a very high rate of infection compared to what you have seen like SARS. You don't really see this kind of infection rate. So that was a threat from the beginning, that if it breaks out of China into other countries, which expectation was it will at some point, can the other countries contain it? Now China has contained it. It managed to handle a very large outbreak of a completely new pathogen. This was not seen earlier.
Not seen.
So they have been able to first do a very quick identification of the problem, put out its genome sequence, also followed it up with extremely quick quarantine, lockdown of the affected
None of
areas.
this is possible in any country for a variety
Well,
of reasons. Most importantly, what you have said also earlier, that the confidence that the people have in the government.
Yes, I think there are varying degrees of confidence that people have in the government, depending on the government. But it is also complicated by the fact what is the public health system you have. So when you talk about epidemics, these are really public health issues. And if your public health system is not equipped to handle epidemics, then you are in for trouble. The Europeans are handling it already. You can see from Italy, it has spread to Germany and France, also to Belgium, and you are starting to see numbers which are quite high.
Yes.
So it seems that European Union is the next in
Indian
line.
numbers are not very high at the moment.
At the moment, no. But
Still
you
in
are-
double-digit numbers.
Yeah, but you see, let's look at it slightly differently. Europe is connected to India. A lot of people have fly back and forth. And then you have West Asia, where Iran has become a big source of the epidemic as well. And you see West Asia, other populations also getting affected. And we have got the infection from Dubai, for instance. So you are already starting to see the spread from different routes, not coming from China, but now from different
So
places.
what you are saying is that we cannot be complacent in India.
I think let's be very clear. Today, pandemic is not a question of if, but a question of when. Because you have already two major centers which have started also helping the spread. One is Europe, the other is West Asia. And then, of course, you have South Korea, but South Korea is relatively isolated in the sense that it is North Korea, Japan, and China. So these are the countries which are close to it, and its interconnections are relatively easier to control. And South Korea seems to be doing also, in spite of the fact they're unfortunate. There is one Christian sect which is very secretive, which helped to have spread this.
Right. So would you say that the Indian government possibly made the mistake of basically looking only at China, ensuring that we seal possible, entry from China, of the virus coming from there, and we were satisfied that we are doing enough, as far as ensuring that Indians come, they're kept in quarantine. That's the way the narrative evolved.
Yes.
That the government, somehow or the other, they put across the message that they have done their job, whereas they should have been prepared for it coming from elsewhere.
Not only that, what are the things you need? You need proper quarantine facilities, as you
Which we
talked
don't
about.
have. Manesar is hardly a CRPF camp or some.
Yes, so what you need to have a quarantine facility, you need to also quarantine different sections. So the people who are earlier in quarantine have been put in now with people who
They
have
cannot
just come
continue to
into
intermingle
quarantine.
among themselves.
Exactly. So the Italian tourists or those who have been affected by them have also been put into the same quarantine camp. So if they are infected, these people who are in quarantine also gets infected, become a bit like the Japanese cruise ship that we are talking about. That
So this becomes a very important time for us to talk about, raise questions about public health system in India.
Correct, quite true. Let's look at the other aspects of it. Look at what is it, how do you treat this in hospitals? We have put now the number of patients in hospitals. Now you need to have what's called negative pressure rooms. So all the things that the patient puts into the air is sucked out. Then you need special filters so that it doesn't spread into the hospital air system. So there are a lot of measures you need to do when you create such facilities. The Chinese have done an enormous job
None
by
of that
creating.
seems to be there anywhere in this country.
I don't think we are equipped to handle a large-scale outbreak like this, even if we were prepared. What is clear is that we had no preparations. To me, it doesn't look like we have preparations. And the last part of it, and we need to talk about that, is the testing. You talked about one viral,
Yes,
one laboratory
just
in
one
Pune.
lab.
Now, if you don't have the ability to do mass testing, and this is what United States is also facing at the moment, much more advanced, developed, but also an equally abysmal public health system situation, that you don't have test kits. So once it gets into the community, you need to do large-scale screening. Now, for instance, China in Guangdong province, one province, they tested 320,000 people over a period of 3 weeks and found 420 people infected. Now, that's a scale of infection testing you have to do to find who are infected. Now, in the United States, CDC managed to test out of about 6 weeks. They had only tested 472 people when they stopped giving us the numbers. So this is also the reason why people are saying that already in Washington state, there is in the community a large spread. But because testing is not being done, large-scale screening is not being done, they are not able to see those patients, but they will surface. And automatically it means the spread has already taken place before you start your isolation, quarantine, lockdowns, and so on. I think Italy is doing a better job. South Korea is doing a much better job, even though they had a huge problem. The numbers were very high initially. But I think we are not equipped for any of this. And if, as I said, it's no longer a question of if, when it starts spreading, as it seems to have done from the tourist batch which came from Italy, as it seems to have come from Doha, we are starting to see community spreads. So I think it will be very difficult globally to see that we can isolate ourselves if rest of the world does get infected. We neither have the ability nor the capacity to really impose complete isolation from the rest of the world as might otherwise be required, because how do you even get your imports? How do you get your other things?
Right.
You're globally connected.
Already you have shortage of a large number of products in the market.
Already is your screens.
So from what you are saying, it looks that we are in for a long haul, possibly as long a haul or maybe even more than what was there during Spanish flu, when it started in 1918 and then went on for 2 long years, right till the end of 1920, even up to the middle of 1921, we could get some evidence of people dying, even in much smaller numbers in 1921. So that is the kind of time that we are actually looking before we can actually weather this out. We have had a large number of other epidemics in the last several years. You had mentioned SARS, there's been Zika, there's been Ebola. There have been various scares, but possibly the fear of this being of a much larger scale is there, which brings us that we must talk about the Spanish flu, because that was the first real became part of our consciousness. A very important point, which is quite often missed, is that it happened at a very critical time, not only in global history. It was the end of Second World War, when vulnerabilities the end of the First World War, that vulnerabilities were at very acute, even within India. It was at just about the time when the national movement was beginning to rediscover itself. How going back 1918, the way Spanish flu came with the soldiers and then spread from the west to east, and then slowly the effect of the virus petered out. It became less as it went east and east. Specific things that how do we look at the interplay between the biological developments and also the social and political developments.
Large number of questions. I'm not going to reply
obviously.
or even elaborate.
I'm just putting all the points,
context.
Which the context on the table.
So one thing we must remember, that we did have epidemics earlier or pandemics. You had the plague, you had the Black Death, and that really depopulated parts of Europe, for which history is there. The plague, we have memories of plague repeatedly. Now, all of this rode really what I would call as the transportation vehicles. So earlier it used to be ships, trains. These were the things, this is what the virus also rode, because people rode ships and the road trains. So that's how the spread takes place. And now the virus comes from aircraft, because people do have air travel, flight. And this is the reason the spread is far more, much faster, much quicker. So this is how the virus travels, because it's really traveling through us. So that's basically what happens when you have an interconnected global system. Then of course the virus also rides in the arteries of that system. So that's what really was also about what the Spanish flu, and as you said, it's a misnomer. So Spanish flu actually rode out of the trenches. So it, in fact, when the infected people were moved back to the hospitals, that is when it actually started spreading. So it starts in the trenches probably. People are weak, they have been wounded, and as they're taken behind the lines, then it starts spreading in the population as well. And of course, as you said, it came with the demobilized soldiers. So a lot of the Spanish flu spread is really the war, which creates not only the conditions that people are weak, there is a starvation, all of the things.
It was also in India, that was because of several famines as well as.
And the famine is because you're feeding the soldiers, not the population. So you are systematically taking the food grains out
away
of the
from
country.
the people.
And that's, we also saw the.
And there was a bad monsoon on top of
and
everything.
43 famine was essentially without even a bad monsoon. It was a famine was created because of this. So you have a similar condition. Why does it really create this kind of damage that it does? The very large death toll, because flu epidemics have taken place a number of times. They still do. Even the swine flu, which took place in 2009, did affect a very large number of people, and it's probably said about 300,000 to 500,000 people died of it. But it doesn't have the kind of history that 50 to 100 million, as you said, that number is not there.
1.8 crore and estimated in India.
And 1.8 crores estimated in India. So this is a very, very large number compared to other flu epidemics. One of the reasons, apart from what you said, hunger, famine, all of that, was that it also affected younger people. So 20 to 40 years old, generally who are able to stand up to epidemics and infections and don't get very sick.
It's normally the elderly who are the first victims.
Unlike people of your or my age group,
That's right.
particularly my age group, you're much younger. So unlike them, so the young people generally withstand this kind of things more easily, as you can see also in what we see now of this particular epidemic. Now, why is it that happened? It's because the immune system for the young people seemed to have reacted in a particularly violent way. And that created a very large number of deaths in the young people as well.
People were already sick because of poor nutrition, those factors also
That's the general
contributed.
thing which will take the older and the very young people. But the young adults, this was apparently what is called a cytokine storm that takes place, a trigger, which was unusual for this particular influenza epidemic. It doesn't happen in most epidemics or very few such epidemics, and that's also one of the reasons of the high tolls. Now, as you were also asking, why is it's quietened down, as it were, in 2 years? And there's a particular reason for it. If the virus is so virulent that it kills the host, then it cannot spread that easily, because for it to spread more easily, it has to infect the person and not kill the person.
And not kill the person.
Because if
so that the person can continue to live and then infect other people.
So what happens is those strains which are less virulent are the ones which will spread more against those which are more virulent, which kill more easily.
So that is how the death rate, as the virus moved eastward, after landing in Mumbai or Bombay then, became lesser and lesser.
So what happens is those which are less virulent propagate more and slowly swamp the ones which are more virulent. And so over a period of time, we sort of tame the virus, and then the virus lives much more benignly within us, 3 days, 5 days, and then it infects us every year with some variations.
But it is no longer that virulent, it does not kill so many people.
So the virulence in the bacteria or in the virus, in fact, works against its propagation in the long run.
There was something very interesting while reading about Spanish flu and the way it spread. Something very interesting appeared to me. That is in the case of Bihar, where you have the Ganga, dividing between North Bihar and the rest of Bihar in the south of the Ganges. Now, that is where at that time, whatever little railway lines were there was there. That is why the virus was more there south of Ganga and not north of the Ganga. I found it, very interesting.
Spread with the railway
spread with the railway line. So at that point, it came into India by the ship, and then it spread by the railway line. So wherever railway took it, it went. But now, as you said, that everything is coming by air.
All sources of transport are going to be used by the virus, shall we say, because we are the carriers. We are the carriers. But as of now, there is no indication that it is becoming more benign. In that sense, this virus seems to be as potent in the population that is newly getting infected as it created in China. Maybe we will see drop in the number of people who are seriously ill and the death rate over the next 6 months to 8 months. As of now, we don't see any statistical indication of the same. So it seems the virulence at the moment has not changed.
There's also this, while reading about it, one also hears, that viruses come in various waves. You have the first wave, which is not very, it's not very serious. It is not taken very seriously, or either by the government or by the people. They're very casual about it. In the second wave, when it comes, it actually ends up destroying a large section of the Indian population, of the population. And then you have the third wave, which is not as strong as it was, but maybe just about the last remnants. So in the case of coronavirus, do you think that there would be a similar wave kind of a situation, or because of the way in which the virus is traveling now much more quicker through air, that we may see a different
that
pattern?
is specific to the Spanish flu. It's not something
Which cannot be.
In fact, the variant which came as a second wave, as you said, was much more virulent
than the first
other
one.
Now, that was what spread out with some mutation. That's what happens when it comes in the body. It combines in specific ways, and suddenly you get a far more infectious and a much more dangerous pathogen. In this case, or most cases, that's not what is likely to happen. Successive waves generally make it easier. In fact, the swine flu now is a part of our general flu load. We get it every year, some variations. The H5N1, which was expected to jump and do human-to-human transmission, would have been far more dangerous. Fortunately, it has not happened. So we have to see what is the specific nature of the pathogen that we are dealing with. Unlike the flu, which sort of really spreads in a particular season with warm weather in the northern hemisphere, for example, flu declines. Flu infections declines. We do not know what is going to happen to the COVID-19. By the way, there are more coronaviruses than this.
Yes, and of course.
There are about 7 viruses which affect us. But the interesting point, which I think the WHO Director General and others have said, is that this is a completely novel pathogen. We have to see what its transmission is going to be. At the moment, it's not possible to predict.
So as far as the government of India is concerned, what are the major tasks in front of it? And how can the people respond to it?
Well, the people have to cut down as much as possible on public events, because those are sources of larger spreads. So we should really curtail as far as possible. The government is, as far as the government is concerned, it has to do really 3 things. It has to build test kits, test facilities in much larger numbers, and it should not follow in the footsteps of Big Brother Trump, who seems to believe that magically all these things will be delivered from science, technology, and big capital. That's not going to happen. The second part of it is we need to have proper isolation quarantine facilities. That has to be put in place so that we can actually stop the community spread as far as possible. The third is you have to accept some will fall ill, and once they do, there will be about 20% who are going to be severely ill. We need to build right now the health infrastructure to handle that. And this is something which is really important because you need isolation over there. You need, you need to protect the hospital staff. You need to build special rooms. Chinese built this over a period of 10 days. They could have negative suction pressure in these rooms. So those kind of things we have to do and do it very quickly. And once 20% of the people are seriously ill, you are going to need very serious support systems built there. Otherwise, you're going to see much higher mortality because they need really intensive care support. Otherwise, they can't be pulled out, particularly people of our age group are at risk, who have all other complications, blood pressure, coronary artery, diabetes, asthma, and so on. So I'm not going to name all of them. All of them I also have. So I'm open to all of this.
Some of them, so do I.
So do you. So this is the section which needs intensive care support, and we don't think we have the kind of intensive care under conditions of isolation which is going to be required to handle an outbreak.
There's another thing which possibly needs to be done, which is put a lot of public pressure on government to begin a very serious dialogue on improving public health systems in the country.
And not saying Gomutra, Gobar and homeopathy will cure all of this, which Ayush and various BJP ministers in various states have started saying. So this is the proper issue.
We need a more scientific
We
approach.
need science and societal and governmental action. And this is something which has to be done if we need to contain COVID-19. Otherwise, we'll go, unfortunately, the Gobar way.
Thank you, Praveer. It's been, extremely nice speaking to you and very educative for all our viewers. The Spanish flu impacted lives of many Indians, including two leading Indian writers, Munshi Premchand and Suryakant Tripathi, better known as Nirala. While Premchand himself was a flu survivor, almost the entire family of Nirala was wiped out. Their writings mirrored the harsh realities faced by common people. They often even drew from their personal experiences and tragedies, even of the Spanish flu. In today's India, the English poet Badri Rayana has penned a poem, "This is the way the world will end." A few lines to leave you with his thoughts. The world will not end with war, however fancy our arsenal. Something invisible like a corona will be a surer route to hell. The other virus is of hate, of equal puissance. Between hate and corona, our arsenals have little chance. Goodbye on this rather depressing note. Thank you for watching.